Hi, and welcome to the first Open Mind of 2024. I really cannot think of a better way to begin the new year and the fall 2024 Open Mind season than by learning some new evidence-based techniques on how to manage stress and build resilience. And how lucky for us, because today's speakers are here to do just that. I'm Vicki Goodman, and on behalf of the Friends of the Semel Institute and the Resnick Hospital Board of Advisors, it is my honor to introduce today's featured speaker, Dr. Jenny Taitz, author of the best-selling book, Stress Resets, Turn Off Your Inner Volume in Minutes. Can't wait. In her new book, Dr. Taitz gives us 75 evidence-based and scientifically grounded techniques and exercises to manage our stress and build resilience. Dr. Taitz is a clinical psychologist and serves as an assistant clinical professor in psychiatry at UCLA. She completed her fellowship in psychology at Yale University School of Medicine and achieved board certifications in both cognitive and dialectical behavioral therapy. Passionate about spreading hope to a wider audience, Dr. Taitz enjoys writing for publications such as the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and Harvard Business Review, and sharing her work on leading podcasts ranging from NPR's Life Kit to Spotify's Call Her Daddy. In addition to treating clients in her private therapy practice, Dr. Taitz is the author of How to Be Single and Happy, Science-Based Strategies for Keeping Your Sanity While Looking for a Soulmate, and End Emotional Eating, Using Dialectical Behavior Therapy Skills to Cope with Difficult Emotions and Develop a Healthy Relationship to Food. Both books earned the Association of Behavioral and Cognitive Therapy Self-Help Book Seal of Merit for allegiance to research and readability. Dr. Taitz is also to be applauded for her generosity, as she is donating a percentage of her profits from her new book to 3 nonprofit organizations. ARC of the United States, an organization that promotes the human rights and inclusion of individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. To the Breath, Body, Mind Foundation, which offers disaster survivors evidence-based techniques to enhance their resilience and well-being. And to Second Nature, a charity that educates and supports families who want to foster or adopt. Bravo to Dr. Taitz. We are also honored to have with us Dr. George M. Slavich, who will join Dr. Taitz in conversation. Dr. Slavich is a leading authority in the conceptualization, assessment, and management of life stress in psychological and biological mechanisms, linking stress with mental and physical health, and in systems and policies for reducing population-level health disparities and achieving greater health equity by addressing stress-related factors at the individual and collective level. He is presently a professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Biobehavioral Sciences at UCLA, where he directs the UCLA Laboratory for Stress Assessment and Research. In addition, he serves as director of the California Stress, Trauma, and Resilience Network, director of the UCLA Bruin Stress Resilience Network, director of the Branko Weiss Fellowship International Collaborative Grants Program, director of the Global Belonging Collaborative, co-chair of the APS National Task Force on Stress Management in Primary Care, and associate director of the National Institute on Aging Stress Management Network. Dr. Slavich is also the director of the Evaluation and Evidence Department for the UCLA-UCSF ACEs Aware Family Resilience Network, which is California's statewide initiative to develop, promote, and sustain evidence-based methods for addressing the negative impacts of adverse childhood experience and toxic stress physiology on health and well-being. His work has been covered by media outlets including the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Guardian, the Atlantic, Scientific America, Time Magazine, HPO, and HBO, and NPR, among others. We want to thank both of our preeminent presenters, Dr. Jenny Taitz and Dr. George Slavich, for taking the time from their busy schedules to share their evidence-based advice on managing stress and building resilience. For those of you who are new to the Open Mind, this is our free lecture and film series that brings together thought leaders at the intersection of science and culture for meaningful and thoughtful programs about mental health issues. The Open Mind is proudly sponsored by UCLA's Friends of the Semel Institute for Neuroscience and Human Behavior and the Resnick Neuropsychiatric Hospital Board of Advisors. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. Today's program will run for approximately 1 hour, with the last segment of the program reserved for your questions. If you would like to ask either of our speakers or both of our speakers a question, we ask that you please type it into the Q&A located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We have over 1,400 people registered for today's program, so we appreciate your patience while we do our best to get to as many questions as possible in the time allotted. Today's program is being recorded. You can view it on our website, friendsofsemelinstitute.org. You'll also find a library of videos from past Open Mind programs and from WOW, the Mental Health Summit with Oprah, calendar of upcoming Open Mind events and special events, including our Teen Advisory Council's inaugural Gen Z Wellness Summit, which will be held in person on Sunday, February 25th at UCLA, and the Open Mind Film Festival for high school students on Sunday, April 21st. Again, details on our website, friendsofthesemelinstitute.org. And now please join me in giving a warm Zoom welcome to Dr. Jenny Taitz and Dr. George Slavich. Thank you so much.
Wow, thank you so much, Vicki. The best stress buster is to have an introduction by you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Hi, Jenny. Good to see you. How's your day going so far?
My day is going great. It's really wonderful to see you, George.
Good to see you too. And thank you everybody for logging in. We know you have lots of Zoom rooms to choose from on the vast internet. So we're so glad to have you here and looking forward to this conversation. There's this joke in academia that research is me search. And so I couldn't have been more excited to get this Stress Resets book in the mail from you, Jenny. I have to just open by asking maybe the obvious question. You're a clinical psychologist. You've trained at some of the best places, New York University, Yale. You could probably be doing just about anything with your time. So why spend a year plus writing this book, and also why now?
I wrote this book because I think stress is universal. We all experience stress. And the thing is relatively simple solutions can go such a long way in improving how we feel. And so I was really struck, actually, it started at UCLA. In the peak of the pandemic, a colleague of mine, Gil Hoffman, who is a friend of Semel as well, he mentioned to me casually when we were just talking that there had been a study done at University of Pennsylvania, which is obviously very reputable, that found that people going into surgery, which is obviously such a stressful time, half of the people were offered a benzodiazepine, a medication like Xanax or Klonopin. Half of the people were offered the opportunity to listen to a song. And remarkably, the song had almost similar properties to the anti-anxiety medication, and songs don't have side effects. And this got me thinking about all of the ways we can easily and quickly improve how we feel in a matter of minutes. And so I wrote an article on stress resets that went viral in the New York Times, and I wanted to expand on this because I don't think we should just be putting out fires, but living a life that feels more like a buffer. So we're not just going from crisis to crisis. And these are all of the tools that I use myself as a mom of 3 little kids and as someone who really enjoys working with people in crisis. These are the practices that are part of my routine and that I'm so grateful to have learned as a professional. And I don't think these should just be limited to people that study psychology. I think everyone should be able to, regardless of ability to afford therapy. I think everyone should have access to some of these tools.
And so, I mean, you're of course a consumer of stress busters, but also now a expert synthesizer. Were you surprised to learn about the vast array of evidence-based interventions? I mean, I guess what was most surprising about uh, this initial finding from music, but then what you learned once you opened up the hood?
It's truly remarkable how I think in our society we tend to go big. We think, I'm upset, let me really treat myself or really escape in a big way. But it's really remarkable to me, and this is predating writing this book, just how relatively simple solutions. I started my career before becoming a psychologist. I volunteered at the Suicide Prevention Center, and it was really daunting as someone in college to help someone in life's hardest moments. And it was really surprising to me that relatively simple things, when someone is really emotional, having an empathic person give you concrete tools can change everything. And so these are certainly, yeah, there's so many things that surprise me, but and different things work for different people. So I want people to know that if I share something that might not resonate with you, there are a host of many, but one small one that comes to mind is just how stress really has a lot to do with our thinking. And there are so many ways, if trying to convince yourself that your thoughts are judgmental or the worst case scenario hasn't resonated with you, doing something playful like singing your thoughts can totally take the stress out of them. So if you think something like, I'm the biggest loser, and that thought shows up for you every Saturday night when you don't have plans, playing with that thought, singing that thought to the tune of "Do you believe in magic?" which everyone should listen to, just to hear kind of how incompatible and incongruent that is with that thought, but really learning. And this is something that I really that really changed my life early in my career, to see a lot of the thoughts that weren't moving me towards the life that I wanted as almost like spam rather than dictators. And so that is one very practical way learning some of these tools has changed my life.
You mean treating your negative thoughts like spam?
Playing with them rather than having them
Yes.
be bullies that hold you hostage, letting them be something that you can laugh at, untangle from, have a sense of humor around.
I love that idea. And you also talk in the book, and it's implicit how many of these strategies are free, right? They're available to all of us and don't require anything other than some motivation and dedication.
Exactly. And I think we make our lives much more stressful when we go big in ways that are almost like a high interest credit card. They quickly take a load off, but they end up being things that we regret or feel guilty around. And I want people to remember that you can find things that maybe aren't as alluring in the short term, but that come with an added dose of accomplishment or feeling of mastery.
Yeah. You talk in the book about sort of the lowercase stress and the all caps stress, right? I mean, we're all going around our world, and especially in this American westernized society, we wear stress as a badge of honor, right? It's the adrenaline on which this culture sometimes runs, and maybe we're not totally ready to give that lowercase stress up, right? Sort of the feeling of challenge and exhilaration. And then on the other hand, there's the real stress, right? The all caps, the trauma, the terrible breakup, the chronic financial problems, housing insecurity, food insecurity. How do you differentiate the two? How do you think about them, and how do we know which one to deal with? And which aspects of that construct are beneficial, and which ones are the ones that we have to take a second look at and try to address.
I do want to take a moment to acknowledge that so many people are experiencing so much hardship that's not their fault, and that is really unfair and painful. And I also want to recognize that because life can be so stressful and this can be a particularly challenging time for so many people, we need to kind of look at the ways we take stress and prolong it. And
Hmm.
so stress is just stress, pain is just pain, but stress plus non-acceptance, fighting against it and trying to escape it and leaning on solutions that really undermine your innate resilience and also getting lost again in overthinking, those are the things that we want to target, really acknowledging that life is hard. And honestly, stress is the price we pay for a life that's meaningful. It's inevitable if we are living a life that matters to us, that we will face stress along the way. But the real question is how do we respond to it? Are we flexible? Are we accepting? Are we allowing our bodies to do what it does without putting out a do not disturb sign that makes, stress responses overhaul you and hijack your full focus?
Mm-hmm. So part of what you're saying, if I'm hearing you correctly, is that fighting the stress itself is actually part of the problem. I mean, fighting
Exactly.
against its existence, or
Exactly.
hoping that there's a world without stress.
Exactly. I want to teach people three main tools: how to break free of the thoughts that really take something that's already stressful and escalate that. I want to help people deal with their body's stress response, because accepting your body's stress response, and there are specific ways you can learn how to do so, even if you struggle with something like panic, accepting your body's stress response automatically frees you up a bit, and then learning to approach the things that matter to you rather than doing the things that are very tempting to do, which is acting on our emotions. And when we're stressed, sending an angry text message or procrastinating or spending hours on social media or canceling in a way that's not going to serve you. And so really remembering that there are multiple points that we can, even if there's a lot in our life that we can't control, what we can exert some effort around changing and improving.
That makes a lot of sense. In the book you write about the potential downsides of treating stress with medication, in particular benzodiazepines. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because, if you go and see your healthcare provider, would not be unusual that a first line of treatment would be a medication for stress, anxiety, depression. Say a little bit about, your perspective that you bring through on the book with regard to that.
Yeah, this is one of the things that has broken my heart the most as a provider. I have seen so many people that lean on medications like Klonopin and Xanax as a way to cope with anxiety, and they don't realize that those medications are incredibly habit forming and undermine our ability to lean on behavioral tools. So it's pretty ironic to me that when we're most stressed, we need to be our sharpest, we need to be ready to think clearly and act quickly. And benzodiazepines actually really slow us down. They're sedating, they blunt our thinking. And so it just seems so tragic that when we need to be our sharpest, we're taking something that is addictive, could lead to cognitive decline, and in the moment holds us back from being our best, brightest selves. And what's really important for people to realize is that there are so many other ways to cope with intense emotions that have no side effects, that aren't addictive, that only come with plus sides. And even the term anti-anxiety medication is interesting because, again, we want to be flexible and willing and really see that emotions come as a wave. We don't need to interject and push them away. And your body is your best pharmacy. I want people to realize that, as Vicky so kindly mentioned, one of the organizations that I'm donating a percentage of proceeds from this book is called the Breath, Body, Mind Foundation. And I was really struck in doing the research for this book that even for individuals that are living in disaster zones, leaning on breathing techniques that are accessible to all of us and available on apps for free can have a profound life-changing effect. And so sometimes people think things are really bad, I need to take something outside of myself, but I really want people to remember that there are practices at your fingertips within you that are your best pharmacy.
I love that message. And one of the great stress buster recommendations that you provide in the book is to practice panic, which sounds totally crazy, right? Because why would anybody elect to put themselves through a panic episode if that's exactly what it is that they're trying to avoid. So tell us why that's helpful and what it does to the brain and the body.
Yeah, so it's really alarming and scary when all of a sudden in an important moment, it feels like your body is rebelling against you and you're getting sweaty and you feel like you can't catch your breath. That is really stressful. But what people fail to realize is if you can take a step back and think, okay, when I am about to go into a meeting with my boss, if I'm experiencing, if I'm in a flight with intense turbulence, if I am in a crowded space that's difficult to leave, I know that I'm going to feel dizzy, I'm going to feel short of breath. If we can list out what your exact physical sensations are that you're dreading and that leave you canceling plans and avoiding things that might elicit that response, if we could help you recreate those in a safe environment, so you're putting out a welcome mat for what you want to shield yourself against by repeatedly practicing for a minute. Like I could help someone spin in their chair if they feel dizzy. I could help someone hyperventilate with like taking a coffee stirrer straw, pinching their nose, just sipping in air through the tiny aperture of the straw. And doing that, people are really surprised to see that if they can create something that feels out of control and learn to practically accept it in a safe space, you uncouple what feels terrifying and see that it is actually just temporary. And by, again, inviting in what seems dangerous, you're in the driver's seat and panic and your body is in the trunk, and it's a lot easier to reclaim your life. And I love when someone comes into my office and tells me that they have panic, because most people have never heard of this. And this is something that you can do relatively quickly. And people can certainly practice this on their own. I guide people on how to do so in the book. And also, if you feel like this is something you couldn't do on your own, a lot of CBT professionals offer this.
Isn't that incredible? So again, another lesson that actually avoiding the situation, avoiding the fear, rather than reducing the stress may actually be both compounding the situation, but also preventing you from practicing exactly the resilience strategy that would benefit you.
Yeah, exactly. And so the combination of learning to play with your thoughts and allowing your body to do what it does, and even appreciating its resilience and ability to come up and come down, those two things should, for people listening, those two things should exponentially reduce feelings of stress.
You talk also in the book about how your thinking style can play a significant role in making, time limited events like an argument or something live on for a long period of time, and how there's so many strategies that focus on the role of thoughts in your stress response. Why is that so important, and what can we do about it?
This is so meaningful because you taught me about this when I interviewed you for my book. And so one of the things for everyone listening that I asked George when I interviewed him as part of my research, given he's such a distinguished expert in this space, how people can deal. What I said to George, what do we do if someone does have chronic stress? What if you are a caregiver to someone that is really struggling? How can someone that does have ongoing difficulty day to day not face chronic stress that we know is bad for us and it takes a toll on our body? And George remarkably said to me that by learning to put stress down, you can take something that's a chronic stress and make it an acute stressor, so it's more short-lived. And so we need to remember that when someone is asked, what is the worst thing that happens to you? Even what is the worst thing that has happened to you? Even if that thing happened years ago, in retelling it, you re-experience physiologically the whole package. And it's so easy to imagine you had something upsetting happen at work that was maybe 7 minutes, and then 7 hours later, you're venting about it and talking about it in length instead of doing something to be present in the moment. And this is what really tortures us. And so I want people to know that there are so many ways, even if you think you're a professional ruminator, to put things down.
I see you looking at me there. Yeah, that's something that I've always struggled with personally too, because I guess Well, that's the challenge of sort of being in your head, right? Because you can sort of recreate that reality over and over again, regardless of whether you're actually in that situation or the situation was 5 minutes, 5 years, or 50 years ago.
Yeah, and this is something that I also personally very much struggled with, but a lot of the tools that I found helpful that I teach my patients as a DBT and CBT therapist are ones that I personally practice and have changed my life. And some of these are very surprising. And one very surprising one is doing something like taking a salad bowl and filling it with ice water and holding your breath for 30 seconds and submerging and doing this. I mean, it's like jumping into a cold pool. There's no way you're going to be on the same loop when you're so physiologically transformed, and this also really slows your heart rate, so it gets at the physiological plus the psychological.
A quick way to jolt you out of your negative thinking for sure, right?
30 seconds. 30 seconds.
I love that. Okay, another one of your suggestions is evidence-based recommendations, I should say, is called opposite action. I mean, I guess in some ways it makes intuitive sense, right? Do something different than the negative, your sort of negative prepotent response. But what is opposite action all about, and why is that helpful?
Stress isn't just a feeling, but it's also a behavior. If we think about it, if you have something due tomorrow and you're procrastinating and postponing or going the other way and perfecting, those things really, really stress us out. And so realizing that emotions don't just happen to us, but we co-create them. And if we take a step back, we can realize that every emotion has a corresponding action. And so if we're sad, we might want to withdraw. If we're anxious, we likely want to avoid. If we feel shame, we might want to hide. And doing those things, as instinctive as they feel, only perpetuate and exacerbate those emotions that we might want to change. And so to change the course of your life, that starts with acting different than how you feel, when acting how you feel will not help. And so a lot of people feel like, what can I do differently right now? And so I think to just look at your day today and think about, if I could do a take two at any juncture, what would that look like? And can I mentally rehearse doing different tomorrow? And it sounds very simple, but apps that coach people to create a schedule, and the schedule has things that give you an opportunity to feel accomplished, doing that works as well as antidepressant medication for moderate to severe depression. And so these things really change the story we tell ourselves about our lives. Sometimes it starts from the outside in, but I should also say that opposite action it has to be all the way. It has to be your mind and body, because otherwise it's like doing the splits. It's being nice to someone while thinking resentful thoughts. It's not going to grow you and stretch you.
Yeah, but I have to ask it sort of, it's a silly sounding but serious question, which is, how do you decide when you're ready to really change, to really do opposite action in your life? Because reflect on my own life. I mean, I know some of my weaknesses, I know some of my strengths, but we all get so comfortable in our own ways of thinking, and doing opposite action means, well, being willing to live a life that is very different than the one that has brought you a lot of comfort, even though the comfort may come with downsides. So I guess it's a question of sort of, how do you gear up? How do you gear up to make such a drastic change in your life, and how do you stick with it?
Willingness is such a good point, and that's that was going to be what I said is we need to be willing, and this isn't something that we can opt out of. We need to, a lot of these skills are things that aren't necessarily natural, but they're priceless. I think taking a step back and looking at the costs of doing the same thing that you've been doing, looking at the pros and cons of that versus the pros and cons of doing something different. And I think really accepting that what you've been doing hasn't been working for you and there's an alternative. And the more you do it, the more you buy into it. And I personally feel like, being a CBT therapist, I kind of live an opposite action lifestyle. It's like, if I have a plan to go to a gym class in the morning and I think I'm not in the mood, there's not even, it's a very short inner dialogue, because it's, of course I'm going, like, that's noise. And my schedule as my driver, because that was created from a place of wisdom rather than a fleeting feeling that really might make things much worse. And if you indulge in that feeling, it could snowball. And so this is a really important question. Of course, opposite action does sound relatively easy, but it requires a lot of openness to be curious and to experiment with, would I be open to doing something different if what I've been doing hasn't been working? And I think this is an incredible gift that we can give ourselves, to see that regardless of what's showing up in our lives, we can do different. And peace of mind isn't life being easy, but knowing that we can count on ourselves.
I love that example. And just as you're speaking, I'm realizing that I've been doing opposite action for 20 years in a very specific way has been very therapeutic for me. I grew up painfully shy. I have memories of not being able to ask to go to the restroom in preschool, and at some point in my own CBT therapy training, I realized that the longer I sat with that inhibitory thought, the more likely I was to do nothing, just like you said. And the only way that I could break that cycle was to use the thought as a red flag to approach and to do the thing that I didn't want to do before I thought about it. Because the more that I thought about it, the more quickly I was going to convince myself that I should, in fact, not do it. So in my case, it was sort of avoiding people or avoiding asking for things. And I suppose that's exactly what I was doing, sort of tagging this opposite action and doing it automatically as soon as that first thought popped in my head that I shouldn't do something.
Exactly. And your example so nicely illustrates how we need to stack all these tools together, because that required thinking more helpfully, allowing your body to be uncomfortable initially, and then choosing your behavior rather than diverting to autopilot. And so I think these all work really well in tandem.
Yeah, and for me, it was really the second one. It wasn't the more useful thoughts, because what I realized was any additional thoughts were going to be of one kind, which was to just convince myself again that I shouldn't do it. So for me, in that case, it really was kind of getting out of my thinking mind and getting into the doing. And as you say in the book, just doing the exact opposite of what it is that my instinct said I should do.
Yeah, thank you. And George, I am so honored to be having this conversation with you. And it feels like we're coming full circle, because you're one of the first people that I interviewed when I started writing my book. And I want to give everyone watching the opportunity to learn a little bit about your work, and for you to share some of your latest research. And so I wanted to ask you a little bit about, if it's okay to shift gears.
Of course.
I wanted to ask you about, there are so many different stress reduction strategies that work. We've talked about cognitive behavior therapy, there's mindfulness meditation, exercise. How come do they all exert positive effects for the same reason?
Yeah, that's such a great point, and I think your book highlights that, right? That it's not, first of all, it's not a one solution for everybody. And that's really important for the same reason that you mentioned. Some people are very analytical, and so it's easy for them to focus on their thoughts and to monitor their thoughts. They are naturally mindful about their thoughts. So when you start talking about, what kind of thoughts do you have, and let's focus on them and change them, it's pretty easy for them to do that. For others of us, we're not naturally inclined to monitor our thought patterns in that way. And for those folks, something that's more focused on the body or on your physiology comes more naturally. So I think the first answer to that is that you have to adopt the strategy that naturally fits with the way that your mind and your body works. I think the other answer to that is that these different intervention strategies, they all are effective. The ones that you mentioned, cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness, meditation, but sometimes for very different reasons. So, for example, as you know, and as many of the listeners may have experienced, if they've been in cognitive behavioral therapy or tried doing self-help, part of cognitive behavioral therapy involves examining your thoughts trying to identify thoughts that are negative, very negative, or exaggerated in a negative direction, and then sort of be an investigator about those thoughts. What's the evidence to support that degree of negativity? What's the evidence that doesn't support that extreme thought? And then you sort of rewrite that negative thought to be more fair and balanced. So sometimes, the main problem is that you're having thoughts that are more negative, let's say, than what's warranted given the evidence. And so for those cases, cognitive restructuring and CBT are very helpful. Another problem that I have, that a lot of people have, is that their mind wanders. Their mind wanders to the future of what could be or what might be, or their mind wanders to the past of what happened and how bad it was and their regrets about that. And sometimes we do both in the same moment or in the same sentence. We wonder about the past and what could have been, and also about the future. And in those instances, mindfulness-based stress reduction or mindfulness meditation is extremely useful, because what's the tool all about? It's about noticing where your mind is, where your focus is, and non-judgmentally, gently bringing your focus back to the present. And what's unique about the present, oftentimes the present is absent of problems or absent of threat. Not all of the time, but if we think about those negative futures that we're creating in our mind, or putting ourselves physiologically in the negative past, if we can gently bring our focus back to the present, sometimes we find that actually the present is just fine. And so you can see there are all these different interventions that are very different, but can be beneficial for very different reasons.
I love that. It's different things work so differently for different people. And I think at different moments, even if it's the same person, different things, you respond differently to different tactics. And
that's right.
And I also love the idea that there's no all or nothing. You could turn the mind at any moment. If you were struggling with mindfulness, you can pivot at any moment with intention.
That's right.
You also talk a lot about social safety theory, and I would love to learn a little bit more about that and hear about.
Yeah, we've been researching these concepts of social safety theory for about 15 years now. And, the idea goes back to the importance of close social bonds and, for human survival and reproduction. This, isn't surprising probably to the listeners here, that forming and keeping, friendly social bonds is really important for reproduction, but also really important because it confers a sense of physical safety and social safety, and is also the resources. It's also the lifeline of people we can turn to, people who are dependable, who are warm, supportive. That's not just what makes life meaningful, but it's also what brings joy and purpose to our lives. And so on the one hand, we're very strongly motivated as humans to seek out and maintain friendly social bonds however we can. But it turns out that our physiology is also set up to respond very quickly to changes in social situations when we're in a friendly relationship and all of a sudden that conversation or that relationship becomes conflictual. We have a very strong and oftentimes automatic physiological response to that situation going sour, especially when it involves some kind of cues indicating social isolation or rejection. And one of the major responses that comes online is the immune system's inflammatory response. And so, one of the most striking findings that we've come across in my work over 15 years of research is that being stressed for only 15 to 20 minutes in a laboratory setting in response to being evaluated by people who you don't even know can increase inflammation throughout the body. And, that in the short term, we think has a very strong adaptive value, because if you're in the presence of dangerous conspecifics, you have increased risk for physical harm. But over the long run, that can cause quite a bit of collateral damage to our physiology. So again, it's what we've learned is exactly what you mentioned, that in the short term, these physiological stress responses can be extremely adaptive. But what we need to practice doing is making sure that they don't become elongated, that we're not having that beneficial physiological stress response for any longer than what's required to essentially manage the situation in front of us.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And some of what you're saying is reminding me of a study that I found fascinating in writing this book, which was even if you don't feel like you're particularly extroverted, being told by an experimenter to start up a conversation at Starbucks with the barista actually improves positive emotions. And so a lot of people might feel lonely and worried about rejection, but small changes to your daily routine can foster a feeling of connection, even if it's a casual relationship.
I love that. And just as Vicky's hopping on here again, because I see we have a lot of questions in the Q&A, Jenny, I have to ask you, you talk about singing your thoughts, and you mentioned this at the top of the hour. I have to ask you, what's your favorite song to sing your thoughts to?
A client of mine, this is an interesting one. A client of mine suggested, so I got this from a client, but it's so good. There's a song called What is Love by Hathaway. And so rather than getting into every specific thought, if you think, what are thoughts? And if you want to really have a good giggle, if you look up, there's a Saturday Night Live clip with Jim Carrey dancing to What is Love? And if you just insert your thought, what are thoughts? That is a good way to holistically really come to see that the thoughts that don't help us, we can totally laugh at and diffuse from.
And so I mean, it's a philosophical question, but also such concrete implications, right? Because we all experience our thoughts as being real things, real entities. And of course, this taking a step back and realizing that thoughts are just thoughts and not reality is such a powerful concept.
Exactly.
Thank you both so much, Dr. Taitz, Dr. Slavich, for this really informative discussion. And you've given us so many excellent tips to incorporate into our lives, to help manage our stress, to build resilience. And we are very grateful to you both for taking the time from your busy schedules to do this. And we do have a lot of questions. So we'll try to get to as many as we can. One of our listeners is asking for a step-by-step action plan, almost like I was thinking Dr. Thomas Strauss always does a lightning round, to give an action plan when anxiety begins to bubble up. And I know that I certainly have had that feeling where all of a sudden it bubbles up and it threatens to hijack your mood, your peace, your joy. So if you could both comment on that, give us some quick tips.
I love it's very simple, but taking a moment to anchor, feel your feet on the floor, quickly do a 3-point check. What am I thinking? What am I feeling? What do I feel like doing? Is this helpful in the moment? Come back to the moment just to bring awareness, because when we're not seeing what's going on in our minds and bodies, we're just reacting impulsively. And there's also something really powerful about labeling your emotions, because even labeling them is a very powerful way to start to regulate them, because they become things that we have some working distance from rather than all consuming. And again, different things work for different people. And so while I love anchoring and labeling emotions as a foundational step, there are so many based on your unique experience that might be powerful.
I love all of those, and I'll add 3 more, which is breathe, breathe, and breathe. And I always find this so ridiculous because we breathe all the time. And you know, that's part of the problem, actually, is that breathing is so automatic that we don't always focus on it as a mindful activity. And it turns out that it's very hard to become extremely anxious if you're breathing in a slow, deep, and controlled manner. So if you can't do anything else, close your eyes and breathe slowly and deeply through it.
Great tip. And a perfect segue into another question asking about apps that are available for breathing or other behavioral techniques that you think are particularly effective.
I will piggyback off what George said, but I love an app called Breathe. And there are a lot of breathing apps, but we could maybe link to this on the YouTube video. But this one particularly leads people to practice coherent breathing. So you could pick if you want to breathe in for 5 seconds, breathe out for 5 seconds, practice this for 20 minutes or so. I personally like to practice that daily. It's free and it has metronomes to really help you pace. People could even try this for a moment right now, just breathing in for 5 seconds and out for 5 seconds. And I always aim to do this first thing in the morning. And then if I don't do it first thing in the morning, it ends up being something that I do before bed. And I find for anyone listening that struggles with insomnia that I can't do my 20 minutes because I am out cold after like 5 minutes of slow breathing. So.
It's relaxing. And I will say, there was a world before apps, because I was racking my brain to think of what my favorite app was too. And I realized that one of the non-app media tools that was most useful for me was just a short 5-minute clip of somebody walking through progressive muscle relaxation. So if you've never done progressive muscle relaxation, you basically, in one method, you go from the top of your head to the bottom of your toes, and you tense up each part of your body, and then release the tension. And if you're like me, you carry a lot of tension physiologically in your body you carry a lot of stress physiologically in your body with tension. And I still very much remember doing that progressive muscle relaxation for the first time, and I had the sensation that I was no longer in my own body, because I'm so used to being tense. And for me, doing the progressive muscle relaxation made me feel like I had completely shifted. So, these are things that don't necessarily have to be app-based, but can have a huge impact on how you feel.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We have several questions about stress from living with a chronic illness, stress from losing a loved one. So what people are calling little s stress and big S stress, and wonder if you could comment on and give some techniques or advice on how big life events like that, how to manage and build resilience.
I just want to express my deepest empathy and appreciation for people being here that are having a hard time. It takes a lot of courage to come to this and ask a question, and I'm really sorry for your loss. And one of the things that I've found remarkable is that behavioral activation, scheduling, creating a schedule that looks a little bit like what your life used to look like, or what you might want your life to look like, has been found to be something that has helped people that struggle with prolonged grief, and also predicts coping after disaster. And so it's incredibly difficult, but if you could maybe think about 1 or 2 activities that you might do tomorrow if somehow a miracle happened and you woke up feeling a little lighter, a little more hopeful, and to take some steps towards that. And I encourage, as George was brilliantly mentioning, the power of social support and having a community that is there for you, because both chronic illness and loss really benefit from empathic people around us. And even our experience of pain is reduced when we have pictures of people that we care about. And how much more so to have people in our actual life.
That really resonates with me too. I had a big S this year, and last year, 2023, I lost my father of a sudden heart attack. It was my first loss in a long time, and my personal reactions normally would be to throw my schedule up in the air, to isolate, and for me, it was such a big event that I knew that if I did that, I wasn't going to make it, through in a resilient way. My life was going to be turned completely upside down. I really tried to focus on my schedule, just as you said, Jenny, and to do what I'm not that good at, which is to reach out to friends and family. And the last one that really worked was, you inevitably think about the loss. It's hard not to. but in some ways, the focusing on the gratitude is the other side of that coin, and brings a whole different set of emotions. And in some way, they're not. It's not an either or, right? Because feeling the gratitude and feeling the thanks for what that person brought you doesn't make their loss go away, but it sort of puts it into a perspective that makes it easier to handle. And for me, that was really helpful.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, and so sorry for your loss, George.
Thank you.
We have a question. It says, as a counselor, I have found that writing down any concerns that are keeping me up or stressed, perhaps a letter to someone, is very helpful. Do you agree?
Yeah, I personally practice with clients a newer treatment called written exposure therapy, where you write for 30 minutes 5 times about something very distressing. And this has even been found to help people that have gone through traumatic events. And so something about writing about something can create a little bit of closure and allow you to go deeper into your feelings and help you store something that feels splintered. And for people that do ruminate, there is research that finds that writing about something distressing for 20 minutes can reduce your risk of ruminating and improve depression.
Yeah, and for me, the reason that's so helpful is objectivity. When you have a thought that's, jumbling around in your head, your thought is still sort of you. And the only way to sort of have a degree of separation between you and your thought is to get it out on paper. Because when you get it out on paper, you can start to examine and evaluate your thought just like you would examine or evaluate anything else in the external environment. So I think it's extremely helpful for adding a degree of separation, which then enables you to look at that critically, which is really hard to do when the thought is still in your head.
Thank you. We have quite a few questions here regarding medications, and I know that you would talk. These are many of the techniques that you have talked about are not medication techniques, but is there, one person is asking, is there a time that they're ever appropriate? And another person has asked, what about the old medications that were used? And I'm trying to find the questions so I can list them, but I know there's benzos, Valium, Seconal. What happened to those? Are they ever still appropriate? In some cases.
Yeah, I just want to acknowledge I'm not a psychiatrist, and I don't want to be prescribing advice to people that I don't personally know. And I really encourage you to talk to your medical doctor. I want to also clarify that I'm very specifically targeting the problem of benzodiazepines, not medications that like SSRIs that some people also use for anxiety, medications like Prozac or Zoloft. And it's very interesting in terms of older medications. Arthur Sackler of the opioid crisis notoriety marketed Valium to women who were dissatisfied by their lives as housewives, as mother's little helper. And so I think it's really important to think about, is medication a cure for an unsatisfying life, and what might be a better cure? Because a lot of times we are struggling with problems that are genuine and require problem solving, and a medication might be, specifically anti-anxiety medications, might be undermining our coping. And I think very specifically, if a friend or family member or a client of mine asked me about, should I ever be willing to entertain taking a medication like Xanax or Klonopin, maybe if someone needed to give a eulogy the next day and was really nervous about falling asleep, it was a one-time isolated event that was very specific and isolated, that might be a little bit different. But I really like thinking about what is a better, bigger solution for very understandable feelings.
Thank you. Someone's also asking about panic attacks. what are some of the, and trying to use breathing and distraction and it not being particularly effective. Anything else that you could recommend that might be useful for somebody that is prone to having panic attacks?
So I never recommend people try breathing when they are struggling with panic because it's like I can't breathe and now I have to breathe slowly and deeply. I again can't speak highly enough. I've always dreamed of doing an infomercial for interoceptive exposure or practicing panic. So I'm really excited to do that here. But practicing panic is the cure for panic. Practicing recreating those physical sensations and systematically facing the things that you have been avoiding due to panic.
We should say this, hearing people who experience panic is in some ways the best thing for a clinical psychologist to hear, because there are many psychiatric disorders for which the treatments we have don't always work great, but the psychological treatments for panic disorder do work very, very well. And as Jenny said, they're oftentimes the opposite of what you would expect. You have problems breathing, so you think you should focus on breathing. You experience panic, so you feel like you should avoid it. And those two things often contribute to the problem. But the good news is that this exposure, the interoceptive awareness and exposure therapies are very, very good, and there's an enormous evidence base for them.
And if people
Some
are
of that,
confused,
much of that work being done at UCLA.
yeah, and if people are confused, I mean, just very practically, I have enjoyed leading many patients at UCLA through bringing a winter coat, drinking a double shot of espresso, going into that coat closet, hyperventilating in the coat closet, and people are surprised. They've struggled with panic for maybe decades, and in a matter of weeks and months, they have reclaimed their freedom.
It's really wonderful to hear that you have been, successfully treating patients with panic attacks. Since I know that's something that, in fact, our next speaker was going to be talking about panic attacks. He has a book, No Time to Panic. So I think that's very interesting to talk about and to think about, and diving into it rather than running away from it.
That's right.
We have only time for a couple more questions, but Jenny, I read somewhere that you said swap why with how. And I wonder if you could explain that a little bit.
Yes, so oftentimes we get lost in thinking, why me? Why did this person get the promotion? Why did this person find love on their first dating app and I'm on my 100th app-based date? And rather than getting lost in circular, unproductive thinking, we can think about how. How can I have a better night, regardless of this thing that happened at work? Or how can I have a good day despite this being a disappointing time? So really moving from something that's unproductive to productive, and something that can allow us to create positive steps rather than kind of go through dead ends.
Thank you. Thank you for explaining that. Well, unfortunately, our time has come to an end. This was really an enlightening conversation, and I'm looking forward to practicing some of your techniques. I know one technique that I use when I'm very stressed is to hug my animal, my dog. That seems to do a lot, or listen to music to calm the body. But thank you so much. You've shared so many valuable tips that will help all of us that have been fortunate enough to be on this webinar. So I want to thank our speakers, Dr. Taitz, Dr. Slavich. Again, thank you for taking the time to be here and educate us, make us a little bit smarter, a little bit wiser. I want to thank everybody for the privilege of your time. As I just mentioned, our next virtual open mind was supposed to be with Matt Gutman, who is the ABC national correspondent, and he wrote a book, No Time to Panic. However, he is a war correspondent, and he is now going to be in Israel when we had that talk scheduled on January 25th. So for those of you who signed up for that, it will be rescheduled as soon as Matt is back in the US. Our next in-person program will be on Sunday, January 21st at 4 p.m. at UCLA. It is a screening of the film Junction, which is about the opioid crisis. Speaking of the Sackler family, and that film has already won several prestigious film festival awards. So I hope people will come out for that. Again, it's Sunday, January 21st at 4 p.m. at UCLA. And thank you, everybody, from all of us at the Friends of Semel and from the Resnick Board. We wish you a healthy, unstressful 2024 and look forward to seeing you very soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Happy New Year.
Thank you so much. We're so grateful to everyone that came, and thank you to the Friends of Semel.
Thank you.